We live in interesting times for the headlines. Hong Kong grapples with the aftermath of a night of unprecedented anti-government protests which saw Parliament ransacked as Beijing calls for a criminal probe into the unparalleled challenge to its authority. U.S. President Donald Trump warns that Iran is playing with fire after Tehran says it exceeded a limit on enriched uranium reserves under a 2015 nuclear deal abandoned by Washington. And Corey Goff, at 15, the youngest ever qualifier for Wimbledon, is not content with just beating five-time champion Venus Williams. Now she wants to win the title. And day briefly turns to night over large parts of Chile and Argentina as a total eclipse of the sun plunges a vast swath of the southern Pacific and the cone of South America into darkness. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and now to the news. Hong Kong grappled with the aftermath of a night of unprecedented anti-government protests which saw Parliament ransacked as Beijing called for a criminal probe into the unparalleled challenge to its authority. The semi-autonomous financial hub has been thrown into crisis by weeks of demonstrations over a bill that would allow extraditions to the Chinese mainland, with the issue becoming a lightning rod for resentment towards Beijing. On Monday, the 22nd anniversary of the city's handover to China, anger spilled over as groups of mostly young, hardline protesters breached the Legislative Council. And they hung the city's colonial-era flag into the debating chamber, sprawled messages such as "Hong Kong is not China" on walls, and defaced the city's seal with spray paint. Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam condemned the violent acts on the anniversary of the city's return to China that she says are not in accordance with the rule of law. Let's take a listen.
We have seen two entirely different public scenes. One is regular march on the 1st of July. Regardless of the number of participants in the march was peaceful and generally orderly. And this fully reflects the inclusiveness of Hong Kong society and the core values we attach to peace and order. So demand the government to release without any investigation and checking with the law about whether offenses have been made, that we should release everybody arrested. We should not take any follow-up action against some of the violent acts we have seen, or even to grant an amnesty to all those involved in these protests. All these responses will not be in accordance with the rule of law. With these violent acts that we have seen, it is right for us to condemn it and hope society will return to normal as soon as possible.
The events pose an unprecedented challenge to Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and on Tuesday, Beijing wasted no time in asking Hong Kong to investigate the criminal responsibility of violent offenders. The relevant State Council office said, quote, "These serious illegal actions trample on the rule of law in Hong Kong, undermine Hong Kong's social order, and harm the fundamental interests of Hong Kong." Hong Kong has been rocked by massive protests over the past 3 weeks. The rallies, including a huge pro-democracy march on Monday, have been largely peaceful while calling on the city's Beijing-appointed Chief Executive Carrie Lam to resign. But they failed to win concessions, with Lam refusing to permanently shelve the extradition law or step down. And by Monday, some hardline protesters appeared to have reached breaking point, and they stormed the legislature. Meanwhile, China on Tuesday rebuked President Donald Trump for gross interference in Hong Kong's affairs after the U.S. president said protesters who stormed the city's legislature wanted democracy for the financial hub. President Trump weighed in on the protests in Hong Kong on Monday, saying the demonstrators are looking for democracy.
Well, they're looking for democracy, and I think most people want democracy. Unfortunately, some governments don't want democracy, but that's what it's all about. It's all about democracy. There's never been anything better, and I think we're the best example of it right here in the United States.
我们对有关国家粗暴地干涉香港的事务和中国内政表示坚决反对和强烈的不满。我们要再次告诫有关的国家，要谨言慎行，不得以任何方式干预香港的内部事务，不得以任何形式为暴力违法分子撑腰壮胆，不要发出任何误导的信号。 也不要做出任何错误的举动。
Under the terms of the 1997 handover from British to Chinese rule, Hong Kong enjoys rights and liberties unseen on the mainland. But protesters accuse Beijing of reneging on that deal with the help of unelected leaders. Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong said he doesn't advocate violence. However, he said that if peaceful protests had worked to convince the pro-Beijing leadership to completely withdraw the controversial China extradition bill, demonstrators would not have had to resort to violence. Let's listen in.
I have not stormed inside the Legislative Council. I just surrounded the building, stand on the street yesterday peacefully. And I was shot by tear gas. I am not the one advocate on violence. But of course, we realize that force have been used by activists. I hope people can understand that when those activists storm into Legislative Council restaurant, they get the Coca-Cola and even pay the bill for it, put the money on the restaurant. If they are rioters, how come they still pay for it? No one would love violence happen. Everyone loves to be peace. If peaceful protests could result in government withdraw the bill, no one would love to put their life at risk. Mainstream public might have concern on yesterday's storming action. I would say that this is not the time to agree or disagree because it happened already. So if we hope youngsters don't need to put their life at risk anymore, please put more pressure on Beijing to withdraw the bill. Beijing has already taken advantage of Hong Kong for 22 years. They love to take advantage without listening to the voice of people.
Meanwhile, the Hong Kong legislature was closed Tuesday as police collected evidence from the debris-strewn building while workers swept surrounding areas littered with shattered glass, broken umbrellas, and even hard hats. Legislative Council President Andrew Leung, whose portrait was among those defaced by protesters, said major meetings were now cancelled until October.
The repair and rebuilding of the electrical complex is expected to take a long time. The remaining 2 electrical meetings before the summer recess in mid-July cannot be held as scheduled. The rooms may not be damaged, but our security system, our fire services, our lifts, and also our backup, system, the voting, the quorum belt, the voting belt need to be tested before we can resume any meeting.
Okay. Meanwhile, veteran pro-democracy lawmaker Claudia Mo accused Hong Kong Chief Carrie Lam of trying to shift public opinion by focusing on the young defenders.
Carrie Lam's trying to turn the tables and try to shift public opinion. English. Of course, we do not endorse vandalism. We don't condone violence, but we hope everyone, not just in Hong Kong, but in the whole wide world, will try to understand the Hong Kong young, the desperation exhibited behind the so-called violent acts. Carrie Lam's trying to turn the tables and try to shift public opinion from focusing on our young offenders, that they are to blame. But instead of trying to solve the problems being raised, they are trying to solve the problem raised. And that's a very communist tactic.
Chinese state media have dismissed the protests as mob violence. A zero-tolerance policy is the only remedy for such destructive behavior, the Global Times Daily wrote in an editorial. Britain's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt expressed unwavering support for Hong Kong's freedoms but urged restraint from protesters. He, like President Trump, was also rebuked by Beijing for gross interference. Meanwhile, an analyst at the Lowy Institute in Australia said the ransacking of Hong Kong's parliament by anti-government protesters comes at an especially bad time for Chinese President Xi Jinping, who already has tariffs, Huawei and North Korea, among other issues to deal with. He adds the Hong Kong government is likely to take something of a tactical retreat to allow frayed tempers in the city to cool down. Let's take a listen.
I would imagine Communist Party leadership would have been very angry to see young Hong Kongers on the anniversary of the handover 22 years on in the Legislative Council chamber, waving the British colonial flag, defiling the Hong Kong flag and protesting in such a brazen way. It really cuts against what they've been trying to do, and it undermines Chinese soft power in a sense, because it's saying these people in this special city in China are really rejecting everything that Beijing has to offer them. I think for Xi Jinping, this is one more problem externally that he doesn't need right now at a time when he's trying to negotiate on tariffs with Trump, also negotiating on the issues with Huawei. There's North Korea, Taiwan has elections coming up next year. This is one more problem that he really doesn't need right now. But the important thing is that because Hong Kong is a special administrative region, to a certain extent, he can stand back and let the Hong Kong government take the flak, which is, I think, what Beijing's been trying to do. I think within China, people are getting a very different message through the state-owned and state-controlled media. So they're hearing about, small protests which are very violent. They're not hearing about the big peaceful protests, and they're also hearing about big peaceful protests which haven't really happened at that scale for the government in defense of the police. So I think people are getting very skewed information. But generally there's a frustration on the mainland, I think, with Hong Kong. It's seen as something of a spoilt child that can't accept its place within China, and that these are just young people who are angry and frustrated because China has risen and they feel out of kilter. So there isn't too much sympathy on the mainland, which to my mind is quite tragic, because it suggests so long as there's this misunderstanding on both sides, it's unlikely that we'll see things get better anytime soon. I think the government is likely to take something of a tactical retreat, so to stand back, try and let the tempers die down, try and let feelings calm, and then over time I think it's inevitable that the pressure on the freedoms, autonomy are only going to increase. I think Beijing wants Hong Kong to be much more loyal, not to challenge its red line, questioning the authority of the Communist Party or Xi Jinping, but they will do it in a tactical way. On the other side, I think the protesters are trying to keep the momentum up, but I think when they become more radical, or they sort of take on these sort of acts of vandalism and symbolic violence against the Legislative Council, there's always the risk that they alienate some of the moderates. So I think they're going to shift tactics as well over the coming months, but the fundamental political challenge remains of how can you maintain a mostly free and partially democratic city within the world's most powerful authoritarian state.
To other news now, at least 18 people were killed in Mumbai early Tuesday when a wall collapsed, as torrential monsoon downpours brought chaos to India's financial capital and surrounding areas. Another 69 were injured when the structure came down around 2 a.m. local time in a slum settlement. Kanaji Kambo, as disaster management spokesman for Mumbai's local authorities, said the tragedy came as the teeming coastal settlement of 20 million residents was lashed by heavy rains for a second consecutive day, bringing the city to a virtual standstill. Authorities declared Tuesday a public holiday and advised all residents to stay indoors. Schools and colleges were closed, while almost 100 flights were either cancelled or diverted from Mumbai airport. Australian police on Tuesday arrested 3 men accused of links to the Islamic State group over an alleged plot to attack defense buildings, courts, churches, and diplomatic missions. The men aged 20, 23, and 30 were arrested in raids in the city's suburbs after their online activities raised suspicion. 2 of them will face charges of being members of a terrorist organization and of preparations to carry out terror attacks. Australian Federal Police Assistant Commissioner Ian McCartney said that they had a number of targets, including police stations, defense establishments, embassies, councils, courts, and churches. The plots were said to be in the early stages, but included moves to import weapons and explosives to target facilities in the central business district. The third man, described as an associate, will be charged with lesser offenses. New South Wales Police Assistant Commissioner Mick Willing said the men knew each other via social media, including WhatsApp and Telegram, and shared a like-minded philosophy. Late last year, Australia passed controversial laws allowing spy agencies and police to access encrypted communications from suspected criminals and terrorists. Relatives and friends in El Salvador take part in a funeral procession as they paid their last respects to drowned migrants Oscar Alberto Martinez and his 23-month-old daughter Valeria, who died while trying to cross the Rio Grande into the U.S. The bodies of the man and his toddler daughter who drowned while trying to cross the Rio Grande from Mexico to the U.S. were laid to rest in a funeral ceremony Monday in their native El Salvador. The remains of Oscar Alberto Martinez, 25, and his 23-month-old daughter Valeria had been brought by road from Mexico through Guatemala and arrived in the capital San Salvador on Sunday. Around 300 people attended the ceremony, singing and carrying flowers as the two were buried side by side in La Bermeja Cemetery. A shocking picture of their lifeless bodies lying face down in the river fueled outrage around the world, with some people blaming the U.S. crackdown on border crossings for their deaths. U.S. President Donald Trump last month threatened tariffs on all Mexican imports unless the country cracked down on people pouring across the border into the U.S. Mexico, in turn, agreed to bolster security on its northern and southern borders and expanded its policy of taking back migrants as the U.S. processes their asylum claims to avoid the tariffs. Most of the migrants are from violence-driven Central American countries, including El Salvador. In other news, the vital work of tracing people infected with deadly Ebola virus disease in Northeast Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, is progressing, despite evidence of several massacres in the affected area earlier this month, according to the United Nations. Here's an update from Dr. Ibrahima Soche Fall, Assistant Director General for Emergency Response of the World Health Organization.
Since the beginning of the outbreak, we have recorded 2,284 cases and 1,540 people died from the disease. But at the same time, we have 637 people who survived the disease, and I think this is important. We have a new hotspot in the rural area in Mabalako and Mandima, and the outbreak started there last year and spread to all the disease. So it's important to break this vicious cycle, to contain very quickly the situation in Mabalako and Mandima, where we have more than 55% of the cases coming from. Right now, we are only seeing sporadic cases in Butembo and Katwa, but the risk is still important. As you know, for Ebola, you only need one case to start spreading, or one high-risk contact not follow up can spread the disease. Over 68 million people have been screened in the borders to make sure that they are not moving with the disease. And we have identified so far 19 cases at border level that were detected, since the beginning of the outbreak, 19. We need to continue investing in preparedness because the risk is still there. And since the beginning of the year, we didn't get any financing for preparedness in neighboring countries. It's really important to continue to invest on preparedness.
Iran said it had exceeded the limit on its enriched uranium reserves under a 2015 nuclear deal that has edged towards collapse under Washington's maximum pressure campaign. Israel urged European states to sanction Iran, while Russia voiced regret but said the Iranian move was a consequence of U.S. pressure, and Britain urged Iran to avoid any further steps away from the landmark deal. Let's take a listen.
که من اطلاع پیدا کردم ایران طبق برنامه‌اش از مرز 300 کیلو عبور کرده و این اعلام هم قبلا کرده بودیم و لذا ما بر اساس اون چی که اعلام کردیم خیلی شفاف گفتیم چه کار میکنیم و بر اساس اون عمل میکنیم و این رو از حقوق خودمون در داخل برجام میدونیم.
The United States withdrew from the nuclear deal last year and reimposed binding sanctions on Iran's crucial oil exports and financial transactions, as well as other sectors. Tehran, which has sought to pressure the remaining parties to save the deal, on May 8 announced it would no longer respect the limits set on its enriched uranium and heavy water stockpiles. It also threatened to go further and abandon more nuclear commitments unless the remaining partners, Britain, China, France, Germany, and Russia, helped it to circumvent sanctions, especially to sell its oil. In his comments published Monday, Zarif also said Iran had set out its intentions very clearly in May. The International Atomic Energy Agency on Monday confirmed Iran had exceeded the limit that the deal had imposed on its stockpile of low enriched uranium. The IAEA verified on July 1 that Iran's total enriched uranium stockpile exceeded 300 kilograms, according to a spokesperson. A diplomat in Vienna, where the UN's nuclear watchdog is based, told AFP that Iran had exceeded the limit by 2 kilograms. Asked by a reporter at the White House if he has a message for Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump said he doesn't have anything other than that it is playing with fire. Take a listen.
No message to Iran. They know what they're doing. They know what they're playing with, and I think they're playing with fire. So no message to Iran whatsoever.
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned. An increase in heat stress at work linked to climate change is set to have a massive impact on global productivity and economic losses, UN labor experts said on Monday, highlighting that the world's poorest countries will be worst affected, particularly in West Africa and Southeast Asia. The International Labour Organization warned in a new report that the lost output will be equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs in 2030 and cost $2,400 billion.
Heat stress refers to a situation where it is too hot to work, or at least too hot to work at normal intensity. So it affects workers' safety and health, it affects the economy, and it affects productivity as well. Our report shows that 80 million jobs will be lost in 2030 because of heat stress. We also found that two sub-regions will be particularly affected, and that's South Asia and Western Africa, where the losses will represent 5% of working hours in 2030. Economic costs are huge. They represent 2,400 billion of GDP loss in 2030. That's equivalent to about the size of the United Kingdom economy. Now, there are, of course, human costs. In addition, we also found that inequality is likely to increase as a result of heat stress. First of all, inequality will increase between countries, and we found that the worst affected countries include mostly least developed countries.
People working in agriculture are likely to be worst hit, as the sector will see 60% of the total global working hours lost from heat stress by the end of the next decade. Construction will also be severely impacted, according to ILO, with an estimated 19% of global working hours lost by 2030. According to ILO, heat stress generally occurs at above 35 degrees Celsius, that's 95 degrees Fahrenheit, in places where there is high humidity. In extreme cases, it can lead to heat stroke, which can be fatal. OPEC agreed Monday to extend by 9 months daily oil output cuts aimed at supporting prices and soaking up excess supplies following last weekend's G20 pact between cartel kingpin Saudi Arabia and non-member Russia. The expected news followed an official ministerial output meeting of the 40-nation OPEC countries, which pumps just under 1/3 of the world's oil. Members will gather again on Tuesday for OPEC Plus, and a grouping that comprises a total of 24 crude producers, including Russia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, and Mexico, which is also expected to extend its collective production limits. The enlarged crude producing club had already decided in December to remove 1.2 million barrels per day from the market in a deal which ran through to the end of June. The original outback sparked after oil prices tanked at the end of last year on fears of slower global growth, sent the market surging by 1/3 in the first 3 months of this year. The news nevertheless sent oil prices rallying on Monday, with sentiment boosted also by the China-U.S. trade truce that was agreed at the G20 in Osaka. New York crude gained 62 cents to finish at $59.09 per barrel, while Brent oil added 32 cents to $65.06.
The commitment to a 9-month extension is unequivocal. It's very solid, very strong. I've heard individual commitments to conformity from all countries, both at the JMMC and the OPEC conference, that give me a great deal of confidence that as high as the collective conformity has been for the first half of the year, I am confident that the second half is going to be even better and more uniform.
However, this week's OPEC action was largely overshadowed after Russian President Vladimir Putin and Saudi Arabia agreed Saturday on the sidelines of the G20 to extend the deal by between 6 and 9 months, leaving only the time frame unclear. The cartel's ministers also agreed on Monday to establish a formal and permanent charter of cooperation between OPEC and non-OPEC nations, despite reservations from Iran. Fali said that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Russian President Vladimir Putin had met and enthusiastically supported an extension for up to 9 months.
I think ultimately Everybody enthusiastically came together to support a permanent charter for cooperation with non-OPEC countries. Tomorrow we will put it in front of our non-OPEC colleagues, and I'm quite confident they will equally and enthusiastically adopt it. Well, I think the last tweaks that we introduced today, one was assurance that the OPEC Plus Charter does not supersede the OPEC statutes itself.
A factory in northern France that makes a quarter of the world's Nutella has been blockaded for a week by workers striking for more pay, causing key ingredients to run low, according to unions on Monday. The stoppage has hit the Villers Escales factory of privately owned Italian confectionery giant Ferrero, which normally churns out 600,000 jars per day of the cocoa and hazelnut spread, making it the biggest Nutella producer in the world. Some 160 employees have been on strike since May 27, according to Fabrice Chancel of the Force Ouvrière, or FO union. Production of Kinder Bueno, a snack produced by the same group, had also ceased for almost a week. Chancel said while of the 4 Nutella production lines, just one was working and only at 20% capacity. He said, quote, "The raw materials are starting to run short." The strikers have called for a 4 to 4.5% pay rise, as well as €900 bonus. Management has offered only a 0.4% rise. Ferrero, a family firm known for secrecy and which also produces Ferrero, Rocher, and Kinder Surprise, said the strikers were a minority among the 400-strong workforce at the plant. The management of Ferrero in France accused the Force Ouvrière, or FO union, of rejecting 6 days of attempts at negotiation. Eagle News International will be right back.
Almost 1,000 seedlings have been planted during Eagle Broadcasting Corporation's tree planting activity at La Mesa Dam watershed in Quezon City. Participants from various sectors joined the activity. Iglesia ni Cristo members near the area also helped in this endeavor. This event, under the project of EBC Cares, Enabling a Better Community, aims to preserve and protect the environment and to raise awareness about the effects of climate change. Trees provide oxygen and help clean the air we breathe, provide clean drinking water, and many more. The project has been implemented in partnership with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and other concerned organizations and sponsor. EBC Cares, Enabling a Better Community.
Health is a
More than 220 mayors across the U.S. gathered in Honolulu for their annual conference. Our Hawaii correspondent Alfred Acenas had a chance to meet one of those mayors who takes pride in his years of public service and most notably in his family's history. Take a look.
During a press briefing by the United States Conference of Mayors, Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell introduced Eagle News to Mayor Christopher Cabaldon of West Sacramento, California. What caught us off guard was how Cabaldon introduced himself.
So I am the senior Filipino-American mayor in the United States. I've been mayor since 1998 in West Sacramento, California. So I've been to many of these annual conferences, but it's great to be here in Hawaii with the representation of the Philam community. You know, this is where my great-grandparents and grandfather came from the Philippines to California. It was through Honolulu.
Given his decades as a public servant, Cabaldon looked forward to working with other U.S. mayors in their 4-day annual meeting to learn innovative ways to better serve his constituents back home.
So at this meeting, we're both working hard around big national policies around immigration and infrastructure and innovation and technology, but also I'm here to just learn what are other mayors doing in the United States that I can steal. Great ideas, great pilot projects, what are the lessons that they're learning and bring them back home, whether it's transportation or homelessness or education. There's some great ideas happening all across the United States and cities, and I want to see what I can bring back home to West Sacramento.
The Filipino-American also briefly shared his vision for West Sacramento in regards to current issues such as climate change.
Yeah, climate change is affecting everywhere, and although West Sacramento is not on the coast, we're surrounded by water, just rivers and levees. And so the impact of both sea level rise, but also changes to the forest management, to snowpack, is driving major risks for our people. So we have made a commitment to get to zero new carbon by 2040, maybe even more aggressively. It's one of the most aggressive plans in America to try to do our part to reduce the worst effects of climate change, not just in our city, but around the planet.
Finally, Cabaldan expressed hope that more Filipino Americans would get involved in and make a difference in their respective communities.
There aren't enough Filipino American elected officials in the United States and not enough mayors. So it's really important to be here and to be visible and to show people who we are as a community and to build support and alliances throughout the country with other mayors.
Cabaldan was just one of more than 220 mayors who attended their annual meeting recently held at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. Reporting from Waikiki in Hawaii, I'm Alfred Asenas, 1 with 25.
12 people have died and 9 are missing after heavy rainfall flooded dozens of villages in Russia's southeastern Siberia, according to the Deputy Prime Minister. A state of emergency has been declared in Siberia's Irkutsk region, where dozens of villages have been partially destroyed by floods after river levels began rising dramatically. Mr. Vitaly Mutko said during a government meeting in the Moscow region that some 32,700 people in 83 villages were affected by the floods. 751 were injured, 153 have been hospitalized. Infrastructure has also been affected, he said, with around 13 roads and several bridges damaged. Russia's defense ministry said it had sent more than 1,300 servicemen, vehicles, a plane, and 2 helicopters to the affected areas. Earlier on Monday, the country's emergency situations ministry said it had evacuated 2,273 people. Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the region on Sunday on his way back from the G20 summit in Japan. The Russian leader called on authorities to compensate those who suffered from the floods and to begin work repairing houses. And Paris has banned all diesel vehicles aged 13 years or over from the city center, the latest move in a campaign to tackle pollution on the city streets. Diesel vehicles over 18 years old and petrol vehicles over 21 years old are already banned in Paris, a measure that was extended Monday to a new low-emissions belt surrounding the city. Central Paris, meanwhile, went further by also banning diesel cars, trucks, and motorbikes aged 13 years and over, a move aimed at cleaning up the air in a city that is regularly shrouded in smog. Motorists who flout the traffic restrictions in central Paris, which were trialed during last week's heat wave, face a €68 fine, rising to €135 for trucks and buses.
Donc je le savais déjà il y a 2 semaines qu'il ne fallait pas rouler à partir d'aujourd'hui en fait, mais je suis complètement oublié en fait. Et je pense que mon entreprise aussi. Donc parce que je n'ai pas été prévenu dès vendredi que comme quoi aujourd'hui il ne fallait pas rouler sur Paris. Voilà.
Beyond the city's boundaries, the authorities are also clamping down on polluters in the 47 districts that ring the central Paris region, which are home to around 5.5 million people. Unlike in central Paris, however, offenders in the suburbs where car dependency is greater face no punishment for the first 2 years of the ban. The government agreed to a 2-year punishment-free learning period after resistance from some mayors who feared that the ban could rekindle the Yellow Vest protests, which erupted late last year among motorists furious over fuel price hikes. Now, day will briefly turn to night Tuesday over large parts of Chile and Argentina, as the total eclipse of the sun plunges a vast swath of the southern Pacific and the cone of South America into darkness. Both countries will be under the narrow 6,000-mile-long band that will experience a total eclipse when the moon will completely block the sun. According to Chilean astronomers, the breathtaking natural phenomenon will begin at 13:01 in the Pacific Ocean, and a 95-mile-wide band of total darkness is set to reach Chile's coast 4:38 p.m. These are local time, and then cross into southeastern Argentina. Vicuna is part of the Coquimbo region that is dotted with observatories equipped with high-powered telescopes and where the eclipse will be strongest. An estimated 300,000 tourists have flocked to the region where dryness, crystal clear air, and low light pollution has created a stargazer's paradise.
Muchas veces nos cuesta entender la ciencia y más aún porque son solo teoría. En cambio, cuando uno ya comprueba esas cosas y las entiende o las vuelve parte de lo cotidiano, es mucho más fácil de entender. Entonces, no es solo que me lo dicen, sino que yo lo puedo comprobar y lo puedo ver. Y así muchas veces es más fácil llegar a los estudiantes porque...
And Wimbledon hailed a new queen on Monday when 15-year-old Corey Goff stunned five-time champion Venus Williams as opening day at the All-England Club witnessed shock defeats for title hopefuls Naomi Osaka, Alexander Zverev, and Stefanos Tsitsipas. Goff, already in the record books as the youngest player ever to qualify for the tournament, showed nerves of steel after squandering 3 match points in a tense conclusion on court, one before securing a 6-4, 6-4 win. She made just 8 unforced errors, while 39-year-old Venus committed 25 as the veteran American suffered only her second first-round loss at the Wimbledon. The first was in 1997. Williams had already won 2 of her 5 Wimbledon titles by the time Goff was born in 2004, but the teenager was unfazed. Goff who said she took up tennis due to the exploits of Venus and her younger sister Serena, was watched by her family and paid tribute to them. And finally in our news, the 2019 Department of Defense Warrior Games, a Paralympic-style competition among wounded and injured service members and veterans, brought to Tampa, Florida, around 300 competitors participating in 13 different sports. Now, one of them is powerlifting. Jay Rosquitas reports.
Lift, eat, sleep, repeat. This is the mantra that most powerlifters live by. At the halfway point of the Warrior Games, competition continues to thrive during the powerlifting event. Athletes from all the armed forces, including the international countries, got their shot to push the bar. Literally. The competition was divided by 4 weight categories per gender, in which their primary objective was to bench press the maximum weight that they can with good form. A special designed bench press was created for the athletes so that it gives equal competition between athletes who may have lower limbs or not. We spoke to powerlifting athletes who shared with us their experience in the Warrior Games.
Going into the competition for powerlifting, I'm the team's ultimate champion female contender. So powerlifting was one of 8 sports I had to dedicate time to for many weeks. So for me, my performance met and exceeded my expectations just because of the experience, the environment, having my Air Force family here. It's been amazing.
It didn't matter about the placement and who got what. It was about who had each other's backs. And it didn't matter what branch we were in. That's what I love about it. And that's what the Warrior Games are about. We're all injured. We all have our injuries. We all have our stories. And we're here to share it with each other, build that support system, increase that support group to help us in the long run, not just for today.
And as the finalists took the podium and were recognized for their achievements, we asked what they took away the most from the competition.
I would say powerlifting in general, you got to have a lot of discipline, just like any other sport. You know, you got to put in time in the gym. You have to eat right. You have to take your supplements. And you put in the time, you put in the effort, it'll pay off, man, in the end.
You push yourself past your limits, and when you experience that for yourself, you want to go more. You want to go more, and you want to become a better person overall. And it's that motivation, it's contagious. It's contagious.
I went from being a recluse, not very healthy, staying in my house, stuck in bed, unable to move in pain, and adaptive sports has genuinely gave me a new purpose in my life and gave me a new being to be.
As the Warrior Games powerlifting competition comes to a close, these warriors continue to display grit and determination, traits that are truly inspiring. Signing off from Tampa, Florida, I'm Jay Raskidas, always 1 with 25.
Thank you, Jane. That's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles, always 1 with 25. Good night.